together and hired Mike Hargrove when it was his time as a manager, because that was always the specter kind of hanging over the John Hart and Mike Hargrove relationship, was that John Hart didn't hire Mike Hargrove. You know, that was part of the way the transition went. So there was always that little story to it too. But not only the two, and those are the key hires. I mean, John Hart, that's your general manager, and Mike Hargrove steered the ship and helped get everything to where we know it. The glory days in Tribetown, as the book has said. But Hank Peters was the general manager that made the Joe Carter trade. John Hart was assistant. He was part of it. Obviously, Hank Peters told stories later of how big of a role. Obviously, John Hart did a lot of the scout work and was the one that said, Carlos Baerga's got to be a part of this trade. We've got to get these guys. We can't budge from this, so on and so forth. But that trade was still Hank Peters' deal. He was the one who was the general manager at the time. He went to John Hart and said, tell me which way to go. Is Joe Carter the franchise? Do we build around him, or do we maximize this asset? And John Hart said, you maximize the asset, and they put together the deal, and that began to change the course of Cleveland Indians history. You know, not only that, little things. And again, if you read Glory Days in Tribetown, they talked about this, and John Hart waxed on about this, but think about when he, and I didn't realize it at the time, because you got to think, 1989, I'm still a kid. I'm just getting into my, sports, really knowing what the heck is going on. I remember John Hart being the manager at the end of that 89 season when he coached the last couple of weeks when they replaced Doc Edwards. And I just assumed, the GM put himself down there, almost like you would see in a bad movie or something. Because, the Indians were the Indians still at that point in time, just being honest. But, now I hear about the truth, the reality behind that. That was a Hank Peters call, because he thought he had no intention of John Hart permanently getting that job. That wasn't why he sent him on the field for those couple of weeks. But instead of just putting an interim manager down there and letting him just finish out or play the string or put the assistant coach there, he put John Hart down there on the field so that he could be hands-on with the talent, with the young guys, with all of the things. Like, he just thought, man, this is going to really help him in what I want him to do next, which was to eventually replace himself. And Hank Peters talked about how important he thought that little run there was to opening up the mind and thinking outside the box and different things like that with John Hart as well. Exactly, Bruce, so that he could see, Bruce in the chat room said, so that he could see firsthand what they've got, what they don't have, who comes up, who comes to play, who doesn't, who's got heart, all that different stuff. You see it firsthand, and then it enabled them to go forward from there. Great, great stuff. But yeah, Hank Peters, to me, a name that over the years has just been completely lost in the importance of what he did, and I understand, because there were so many names like pulling them out of a shoebox during that time period that were, just holding the place. Especially, I mean, you had the Indians were owned by nobody for a while. It was the trust, you know what I mean? It was kind of hanging out there like, hey, does anybody want this? I think at one point like 80 people had a piece of the Indians. So it was like, does anybody want this thing? So a lot of those names, persons that were running baseball operations, you couldn't even name them here today, years later, unless you hear it and you go, oh yeah, right. But Hank Peters is not one of those guys at all. And he absolutely needed to be talked about here, and hopefully guys understand that. And I think the Indians will I know they're going to do some stuff to honor him this season, because the Indians went out of their way. They sent a very nice email out, obituary explaining what Hank Peters said. They don't do that for everybody, is my point. They definitely are going to stress the importance of Hank Peters throughout this season, and I think that that must be. But I wanted to bring it up here today because, again, I don't know how many people realize it was not the longest run. He was only here from 1987 until the end of the 1991 season, but it was key, not only in putting those building blocks together in the dugout, in the clubhouse, on the actual field, in the farm system. The Jacobs brothers said, Hank Peters, It's your team. Run it like it's your team. Do what you got to do. So he said, you know what? We're not winning any games on the field. So we're going to slash all the major league, which I know people are going to say, hey, but we're past that now. So we're just talking about history. Don't get hung up in that. Build the farm system. Rebuild the farm system. You saw what happened with the farm system. Led us to a couple of World Series appearances there in the 90s. But yeah, in those 4 years, he not only did all that, but was a key part of a lot of the backdoor maneuverings and machinations that the Jacobs were going through to put themselves in position to outsmart Art Modell, outmaneuver Art Modell and the Browns, and get themselves into position to create Gateway and what became Jacobs Field. So Hank Peters, definitely, I think, in some circles, obviously some Indians fans know right off the bat, but I think in a lot of circles, people don't realize, because you always hear John Hart, you hear the Jacobs, you hear John Hart, you hear Hargrove, you hear the players, but Hank Peters put all of that in place, and I definitely expect, and I think Indians fans will get a lot more knowledge of that and appreciation of that this season, because I definitely believe the Indians will make sure to do that and focus on him and give him a place of respect for his part in creating what is truly the most remembered era, anyways, of Cleveland Indians history. Stuart Scott, Hank Peters, couple of good ones there, each in their own respect, completely different. I guess you could say visionary, even though you would look at the two of them, right? And you would say, how do the two of them tie together, except that they both passed away on the same day? But you could say visionary. Stuart Scott said, hey, man, the way you're doing it, it may work for you, but I think we can do it different, and I'm going to do it. And if it doesn't work, I'll deal with it. And it worked. And I can so dig that attitude, because that's my attitude in life. I'm going to try this my way, and if it doesn't work, then we'll reevaluate things. But I'm gonna try to stay true to myself. And he definitely did that, and it worked, and then some. Hank Peters, in a totally different way, said, hey, no. The status quo is not working. You want this to work? Let's go outside the box. Let's build this way. And he did a lot of things outside the box that turned into create one hell of a box over there on Carnegie in Ontario called Progressive Field, and that era of the 90s, as we said. So two guys, both definitely visionaries of their own, and both will be missed. We're going to take a break, and let's get rolling now, guys, with the show. 216-539-7535. 216-539-7535. Quick segment coming up next. Talk a little bit about the NFL playoffs as they got rolling here. We'll get Dan Wismar on the phone lines. We'll talk Cavaliers and so much more. Don't go anywhere. We're off and running with the Sports Fix. Tell somebody else to tune in with us here during the break. Click the little share button wherever you're listening to the show. When we come back, phones are open. 216-539-7535. Your calls, NFL playoffs, and more. Still have Dan Wismar and so much more to come. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Sports Fix, baby.
This is the Sports Fix.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Hey, call me Mr. Pig!
We'll call you whatever you like, as long as we can call you a fan of the Sports Fix.
Sports Fix listeners, you've heard me talking about it. Millionaires being made all season long at DraftKings.com, America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. I've been playing there too. It's now J-Rock's favorite one-week fantasy football site. What's one-week fantasy football? That means no season-long commitments. Play whenever you want. Have a player who's hurt? That's no problem at all, because you change everything week to week. Injuries don't derail your chance at victory. It's a new season every week. You're never stuck with the same players. You can pick your team in just minutes and be on your way to winning huge cash. This season, one listener turned $10 into $5,000. Another turned $2 into $10,000. And a new millionaire has been crowned nearly every week this season at DraftKings.com. You could be next. Imagine winning $1 million in one day. $1 million just for playing fantasy football at DraftKings.com. Head to DraftKings.com now and use promo code Spreaker to play for free in the $10 million Fantasy Football World Championships. DraftKings.com. Bigger events, bigger winnings, bigger millionaires. Enter Spreaker now at DraftKings.com.
SportsFix listeners, like us on Facebook today. Facebook.com/The SportsFix. Fantasy sports lovers, you put so much time, hard work, and effort into playing week to week that it quickly stops being a fantasy and starts getting real. And when the smoke clears, you want to show off those victories with a real prize.
I mean, a really real prize.
Nobody does that like Fantasy Jocks. The crew over at Fantasy Jocks have beautiful, high-quality, and heavy-duty championship belts, rings, trophies, and so much more for all your fantasy sports needs. There's literally only one place to go. FantasyJocks.com.
Did you know a sugary drink contains around 200 empty calories per can? This is registered dietitian Jim White. It's no surprise, extra sugar means extra calories. This can result in weight gain, offering little to no nutritional benefits. Nutritionally sound beverage choices are water, 100% fruit juice, and low-fat or fat-free milk. Cutting out sugary drinks allows you more room for fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, and low-fat dairy. This is registered dietitian Jim White. Visit eatright.org for more healthy tips.
It's just an old ball, really. Nothing more. We grew with it and studied it. We owned it and shared it. We prayed they would hit it and miss it. We prayed they would catch it and drop it. We wanted it to bounce and fly, speed up and slow down. We prayed it would come to us, and we wanted to give it away. We have watched it weather storms and bask in the sun. And it's always right here in our hands. Cleveland Indians, established 1901.
Hey everybody, this is Jerry the King Lawler from WWE, and you're listening to the Sports Fix.
Welcome back to the Sports Fix live here across the Sports Fix Radio Network. Let's pick up the energy, baby. Pick up the tempo. Booyah! Yeah, that one's for Stuart Scott, baby. Let's roll on with the show. Quick segment. We went way long in the opening segment. We're going to do a little rapid-fire NFL talk here. Then we're going to get my man, Dan Wismar from the Cleveland Fan on the phone. We'll talk to him a little bit about a weekend of football, some Buckeye fallout as we're into the weekly. It's going to be the grind here now for the next week as people get ready here. I think there's one or two of those, not trying to say inconsequential bowl games, but, other bowl games or whatever out. There's one or two remaining before we hit the big one that's coming down the line, and we'll talk about that here. Dan Wismar from the Cleveland Fan will preview some. Oh, speaking of, well, you know what? I'm going to play that now for you guys. I got a call. Speaking of the Oregon Ducks and Ohio State Buckeyes, and I'm just going to leave this to you guys. Feel free to hit us up on the phone lines and let us know your thoughts. If you're listening to the show from Oregon, from Ohio, or from any parts in between or around, let us know your take all week long on the game. Give us your smack talk, and we will play it on the air. Apparently, somebody was listening to Friday's show over the weekend from Oregon. And as you'll hear, he made a call to the show. Let me play this for you guys real quick. And as I said, let's go ahead and get the smack talk rolling here this week.
Hello there. I'm calling from Oregon. Can you please pronounce
Oregon right. It's not Oregon. It's Oregon. Where have you been? Oregon's been a good team for 6 or 7 years. And congratulations for beating up on Alabama, because I'm so sick of these SEC arrogant fans. You know, they don't seem to get it and stuff. You know, so congratulations, and Oregon's going to kick